This is the story of 41-year-old Rosemary Monise, who was found beaten to death in her home in New Bedford, Massachusetts, in March 2001. Her murder went unsolved for more than 2 decades, but recent DNA found inside the conch shell linked Monise's half-brother to her slaying. Her brother was a pallbearer at her funeral. It turned out that the person carrying her coffin to the grave was the one who killed her. This murder was as brutal as it was shocking. On the morning of March 23, 2001, Monise's father dropped by his daughter's home to pick her up for a scheduled doctor's appointment. When he went inside, he found kitchen items scattered on the floor and her purse emptied of its contents. After she failed to answer his calls, he discovered her dead in a pool of blood on the bathroom floor. She had been bludgeoned to death with a fireplace poker, a conch shell, and a cast iron kettle. Her purse was emptied out on the floor, and an undetermined amount of cash was stolen. The autopsy report described significant trauma to her head, including skull fractures, gaping lacerations, and other injuries that resulted in bleeding from both ears, broken nasal bones, and a broken left cheekbone. She also suffered blunt trauma all over her body. Investigators believed that robbery was the motive, but there was no sign of forced entry into the home. The investigation into this case went cold as quickly as it began. After police excluded 2 potential suspects early on, the case went cold. For 2 decades, her family suffered through the trauma of her horrific death and the pain of not knowing who committed this extremely violent attack. Monise's brother, Fred Cunha, told local outlet WJAR that over the years, suspicion was cast over several people connected to the family, including even Monise's own son. For the last 20 years, there's been a cloud hanging over my nephew's head, said Fred Cunha. Fred promised his parents that the killer would eventually be found. And so it happened. I always told my mother and father we're going to find out who it was. And eventually, Fred's positive outlook toward the investigation proved fruitful. In 2019, when investigators from the Bristol County District Attorney's Office and Massachusetts State Police Unresolved Crimes Unit reviewed the case, they found something that could lead them to Rosemary's killer. This time, the cold case detectives looked more closely at the conch shell. The autopsy photos of the victim's face showed that she had suffered numerous abrasions and contusions, which suggested that the spiny exterior of the conch shell made contact with her face. That further suggested that the perpetrator would have had to put his fingers inside the opening of the conch to hold it firmly enough to strike the victim with extreme force. The inner portion of the shell was tested for DNA, and a full profile was found and uploaded into CODIS, the National DNA Database, which finally led to the prime suspect and most probable killer in the murder of Rosemary Monise. And the man was Rose's half-brother, 53-year-old David Reed. Reed's DNA was already in the database in connection with the February 2003 assault and robbery of a New Bedford woman who had been beaten in the head with a tire iron. In August 2020, authorities said they briefly spoke to Reed, who was living in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. Subsequently, they alleged he fled to Alabama, where he worked at a lumberyard until investigators showed up there. Over the next year, he traveled to California, Hawaii, New York, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island in an apparent attempt to elude authorities. Authorities caught up with him on September 10th while he was staying at the Providence Rescue Mission Shelter in Rhode Island. In addition to the slaying of Monise, Reed was also indicted in Bristol County on armed assault with intent to murder and armed robbery charges in connection with the February 2003 attack in New Bedford. Currently, Reed is being held in jail for the 2003 attack. He has yet to be arraigned for the murder of Monise, and it's unclear if he has an attorney or if he has entered pleas to the charges against him. I am glad my parents are not here to know this because that would have killed them, said Rose's brother Fred when they found out about Reed's involvement in the case. What do you guys think? How did Reed manage to comfortably appear at Rose's funeral despite being the alleged killer? How did he pull off a successful escape from authorities for decades? Let us know in the comments below. This is the story of 23-year-old Stacy Falcon-Dewey and her 3-year-old son, Jacob Dewey, from Renton, Washington. The U.S. authorities charged a man in their deaths after more than 27 years. Stacy and Jacob were killed in a Seattle suburb. This case became the subject of the 2019 Seattle Times series, In the Dark, which detailed how, despite seeming to be solved, it instead was neglected for years. All the while, Vianne Falcon, the mother and grandmother of the victims, was never informed of the DNA link found to a suspect. Falcon-Dewey had left her son Jake with a babysitter on the night of October 27, 1994. When she left for a belated celebration of her birthday, she went to the Kenton Ridge apartments to pick up her son sometime between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. the next day. Though they left the babysitter's home all right, she and Jake never arrived at her apartment a short distance away. Around 3:30 a.m. that day, a Seattle Times newspaper carrier called 911 to report discovering a body lying in the road on S50th 5th Street in Renton, a dead-end road 3 miles from the babysitter's apartment complex. It was Falcon-Dewey, and lying on top of her was her young son, Jacob. When the officers arrived, they found the pair lying in the middle of the roadway next to the mother's car, both shot in the head. Falcon-Dewey also had gunshot wounds to her arm and shoulder, one of which authorities determined struck her after it went through her son's small body. In addition, Dewey had blunt force trauma to her head, bruising, and linear abrasions on her neck. Police said there was a struggle at the scene. Evidence collected and documented from the scene suggested that a struggle occurred both inside and outside of the vehicle, and that the killer may have been looking for something. For instance, some of the contents of Dewey's purse were strewn about the vehicle, including her wallet. The keys to the car appeared to have been dropped between the driver's seat and the door and were not readily visible. In the Buick, there were circular sections of brown packing tape that indicated they had been used as binding for Falcon-Dewey's hands and feet. Dewey's belt was unbuckled, and buttons had been ripped from her shirt. Vianne Falcon, Ms. Falcon-Dewey's mother, told CNN that she was emotionally devastated by the loss of her daughter and grandson. "I couldn't believe it, and I went running down the street like a wild woman until I found a place where I could just collapse and cry," said Vianne Falcon, referring to the day police told her about the killings. Swabs and fingernail clippings were taken from Falcon-Dewey's body at autopsy. In February 2001, they were tested for DNA, which indicated the presence of semen in the victim's throat and on her hand at the time of her death. Subsequently, in February 2002, an initial connection was made to the suspect with the help of DNA evidence. This suspect was 51-year-old Jerome Frank Jones. Authorities learned after the February 2002 DNA match that Jones was already behind bars in connection with the Hebden, California, slaying. Detectives immediately flew south and visited Jones at the Salinas Valley State Prison. In an interview with the suspect in California, Jones confirmed that he lived near Renton from 1994 to 1995, but he denied ever meeting or knowing Miss Falcon-Dewey. When shown a picture of Stacy Falcon, Jones said that he did not know her. He was asked this question several times, and he said he was positive that he had never met her and did not know her. The manager of the Kenton Ridge apartments confirmed that Jones had lived there from 1993 to 1994. The records also show that Falcon-Dewey lived at the same complex in 1994, moving elsewhere just months before she was murdered. However, detectives could not find a link other than the DNA results. None of her friends recognized Jones. He was also not seen with her on the night of her birthday celebration. The clerk at a convenience store Dewey visited around 1:20 a.m. on the morning of the murders reported seeing her with an unidentified white man, and contrary to that, Jones is black. In addition, no one who saw Dewey leave the babysitter's home with her son saw Jones or anyone else with her at that time. These reasons were enough for the police to stop pursuing Jones in connection to this murder. Over the subsequent years, additional evidence was submitted for DNA testing. Witnesses were questioned, and the hunt for more evidence carried on. But when the authorities were unable to find any significant leads, the case eventually went cold. A number of other pieces of physical evidence were recently submitted to the crime lab for additional testing, and a significant advancement was made in December 2021. The cold case detectives learned that semen had been found on the sleeve of Jake Dewey's jacket, and the DNA matched that of Jones. A subsequent DNA sample taken from Jones in prison confirmed the match. It was 5 months after Falcon-Dewey and Jake were slain that Jones and an accomplice shot and killed Hebden more than 1,000 miles away in Irvine. Following the shooting, he fled back to Seattle, where he was arrested on a first-degree murder charge. While in the King County Jail, he assaulted a corrections officer, for which he was convicted in 1996. The judge sentenced him well above the standard range in that case. The sentencing court found that the defendant committed this assault with deliberate cruelty, delivering multiple gratuitous blows to the victim even after the officer had fallen to the floor. Sentencing paperwork in the Hebden case indicated that Jones also had a previous conviction for shooting a victim in the back during a 1987 robbery. While in prison, he had been convicted of additional felony assaults as well as felony possession of a weapon. Prosecutors went on to state that Jones clearly presents a substantial likelihood of danger to the entire community. Once he is extradited to King County, Jones will be held without bail pending trial in the double murder of Falcon-Dewey and her son. Jerome Frank Jones has been charged with aggravated murder in the deaths of Stacy Falcon-Dewey and her 3-year-old son, Jacob Dewey. If convicted as charged, Jones would serve a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, on top of the decades-long sentence he's already serving. Felix Verdejo, born on May 19, 1993 in San Juan, Puerto Rico, began his journey in the sporting world at a tender age, swiftly rising to prominence by the age of 19. Celebrated as Puerto Rico's gem, Verdejo quickly made a name for himself in the competitive arena, consistently triumphing over his adversaries, regardless of their reputation or prowess. In 2014, his career reached a significant milestone when a major sports network recognized him as the most promising athlete of the year. By this time, Verdejo's net worth had astonishingly soared to $1 million. This rise to fame was particularly evident during his unforgettable match against Laurel Alcantara, another undefeated contender. The bout, filled with high expectations and comparisons, ended dramatically when Verdejo showcased his dominance by knocking out Alcantara in a mere 21 seconds of the first round. Verdejo's record of 16 wins without a loss solidified his status as an international boxing icon. In 2016, he tied the knot with Rosemary Monise, a renowned social media influencer. The couple, having started their relationship back in 2011 during their high school days, welcomed their daughter Miranda in 2018. However, Verdejo faced a new challenge after a 13-month hiatus from the ring. His comeback was against the world-class Mexican boxer Antonio Lozada Jr. The match, as anticipated, was an intense showdown. Going into the final round, Verdejo was leading but visibly drained. In a surprising turn, with only 30 seconds remaining, Lozada Jr. unleashed a barrage of punches, leading to an intervention by the doctor and marking Verdejo's first defeat. Despite his public persona as an exemplary family man, Verdejo had a hidden side. He was involved with individuals in the substance trafficking world and had numerous affairs. One such relationship was with his ex-girlfriend from school, Keishla Rodriguez, which eventually revealed the darker aspects of Verdejo's character. Keishla Rodriguez, sharing Verdejo's birth year and city, had a close relationship with her parents and her sister. Living in an apartment in San Juan, close to her sister, Keishla's life intertwined tragically with Verdejo's tumultuous path. She lived alone with her 2 little dogs, whom she treated as if they were her children. Keishla was a great animal lover, which is why she worked at a pet grooming salon. One of her qualities that always stood out was her dedication to caring for animals. She was also known for being quite shy, calm, and reserved. She would meet Felix Verdejo in 2010 when she was around 16 years old, and they both attended the same school. They started a relationship while still teenagers, and although many believed they were deeply in love, the truth was that Felix was seeing other girls behind her back, and he didn't make much effort to hide it. His own wife came from the same school, but somehow, both Keishla and Felix stayed together in a toxic relationship marked by temporary separations due to frequent fights. Initially, their relationship was normal until Felix began to rise in his boxing career and met Ellis Santiago. He maintained relationships with both women in parallel. A few years later, out of nowhere, Keishla and her acquaintances were surprised to hear that Felix had proposed to Ellis, which for many showed that he had finally made a choice. Keishla continued with her life, getting to know other people, But despite Felix being in a new family, it didn't take him long to find a way to continue seeing her in secret. This way, Felix would take Kishla on many of his so-called work trips, and they would stay in hotels together far from his wife. Even Kishla's family was aware of this, as he used to visit them as if nothing was happening. As a result of these unhealthy behaviors, Kishla's family always advised her to distance herself from Felix, as he was only hurting her and didn't truly value her. However, every time Kishla attempted to break away from Felix, he would seek her out with promises of love, swearing that she would always be the only woman he truly loved. And surely Kishla believed every word because, despite the years and all the harm he had done, she truly loved him, to the point of getting a diamond tattooed on her back as a symbol that he was her true love. On the other hand, Felix's adventures were no secret to his wife, as she had her suspicions. And as 2021 unfolded, the once promising marriage of the boxing sensation was unraveling. Felix Verdejo, no longer the youthful star in the ring, faced a personal crisis. His wife, Ellis, having grappled with her own challenges in life, found it increasingly difficult to overlook Felix's indiscretions. The core issue lay in Felix's reckless behavior, particularly his habit of sending intimate messages to various women, including his former girlfriend, Kishla. Despite being married, Felix assured Kishla that a divorce was imminent, a promise that only further strained his marriage. Ellis, feeling betrayed by Felix's lack of loyalty, eventually reached her breaking point and decided to expel him from their home. Felix pleaded for forgiveness, desperate not to disrupt their daughter's life with a broken home. However, his excuses only revealed his deeper flaws. He justified his actions by claiming a need for physical intimacy, which he sought elsewhere when Ellis was unavailable. His treatment of Kishla was equally problematic, viewing her as merely an option, giving her only a short grace period to find alternative accommodation. Meanwhile, Kishla discovered she was pregnant, a revelation that brought joy to her family but dismay to Felix, who had always made clear that their relationship was not serious. He prioritized his family and career over everything else, leading Kishla to decide on raising the child independently, in line with her values, despite Felix's reluctance. For Felix, however, the pregnancy posed a significant dilemma, threatening the freedom he cherished. He arranged a meeting with Kishla on the morning of April 29, 2021, under the guise of discussing the pregnancy and confirming its validity. Before the meeting, Kishla informed her mother about her plans, unaware of the ominous feelings her mother harbored about Felix's reaction to the pregnancy news. However, there was nothing she could do, and besides, Kishla sounded calm and mentioned that this time, it was Felix himself who was looking for her because he now seemed unusually interested in the baby matter. That morning, Kishla had to go to work earlier than usual because she had to open the store with her boss. So, without thinking much, she quickly drove her car to the place where Felix had asked her to meet him, which wasn't far from her home. However, at 8 a.m., her boss had arrived early to open the store but saw no trace of her. He messaged her on WhatsApp and started calling her. When he noticed that his messages were marked as read and the calls went unanswered, he began to worry that something bad might have happened. He contacted Kishla's sister to ask her about Kishla or if she knew anything about her absence. Her sister, who had no idea what was going on, was surprised that her sister was missing work like this, so she told Kishla's boss that she would try to locate Kishla to make sure everything was okay. Then, she called her mother quickly, around 9 a.m., to inquire about Kishla since she had received no response from her sister's phone, and Kishla had also missed work. Kishla's mother immediately realized that something had happened to her daughter and that Felix was likely involved because her daughter was not the type to disappear without communicating with anyone. First, she tried to contact Kishla herself, but like the others, she received no signs of life. Without hesitation, she took the first flight from Orlando, where she was at the moment, to get to Puerto Rico as soon as possible. Upon arriving, she went to a nearby clinic that performed abortions to see if Kishla was there, as she knew that Felix had pressured her daughter several times not to have the baby. However, the clinic was closed that day, so she headed to Kishla's house, where she found her daughter's 2 dogs without food, which was quite unusual because Kishla always took good care of her pets as part of her daily routine. All of this indicated that something was wrong, so she started asking the neighbors about Kishla, and they told her that they hadn't even seen her walking her dogs that morning, as she usually did. With this unusual situation, Kishla's mother had no choice but to realize that there was only one person who could answer all her questions about where her daughter was, and that person was Felix Verdejo. So, she began calling him on his cell phone, and after several attempts, he finally answered. When she asked him about Kishla, he responded with an uncomfortable silence and only said that he had no idea where she could be. He repeated this multiple times, leaving the woman with no option but to hang up. Despite Felix's denial and his lack of interest in searching for Kishla, her family didn't wait any longer and reported Kishla's disappearance to the authorities. With Kishla's mother's testimony, the police made Felix Verdejo the prime suspect, as he was apparently the last person seen with the victim alive. The investigation into Kishla Rodriguez's disappearance swiftly commenced, centering on her recent cell phone activity and call history. On the morning of April 30th, Kishla's family made a heartfelt appeal on a live TV broadcast, seeking public assistance in locating her. They disclosed her relationship with Felix Verdejo and her pregnancy, which was reportedly unwelcome news to the boxer. This revelation quickly dominated media headlines. Later that day, Kishla's car was discovered abandoned. It was found thanks to alert neighbors who notified the police, noting its unusual presence in the area. Examination of the vehicle revealed unlocked doors and untouched personal belongings, eliminating robbery as a motive. At 10:45 a.m., Felix Verdejo appeared at the police headquarters with his lawyer, adhering to legal advice to remain silent. Subsequently, Ella Santiago was also called in to give her statement, as the case began to take on the appearance of a crime of passion, and she was considered a potential suspect. The police intensified their search efforts, seeking security footage from Kishla's last known locations and her usual route. Their focus was also on the final known location of her cell phone, which, intriguingly, matched the location recorded on Felix Verdejo's phone, suggesting that both were in the same area at the time of her disappearance. Investigations revealed that both phones had been in proximity to a bridge, prompting a thorough examination of nearby surveillance cameras. Footage showed that on the morning of the disappearance, a dark SUV parked in an emergency lane near the bridge. Someone exited the vehicle briefly before re-entering and driving off. What raised suspicion was the SUV's return to the same spot at least twice more. Further scrutiny identified this vehicle as a black Dodge Durango, identical to the model owned by Felix Verdejo, deepening the mystery and intensifying the scrutiny on his involvement. On Saturday, May 1st, at 2 p.m., an anonymous 911 call provided shocking information about Kishla's disappearance. The authorities wasted no time and went to the location given by the anonymous informant. There, they discovered a lifeless body floating in the San Jose Lagoon. When the police notified Kishla's family via phone call about the discovery of a body that matched certain characteristics of hers, the family was summoned to identify the body, and that's when it was confirmed that it was indeed Kishla Rodriguez. The forensic examination revealed that Kishla had a fractured jaw and a significant blow to her nose. In addition, the blood analysis showed the presence of drugs capable of rendering someone unconscious to the point of fainting. Her hands and feet were bound with a metal cable to a concrete block, which seemed to have been intended to weigh down her body to the bottom of the lagoon. The victim appeared to be alive until the moment she was thrown into the water, leading to the conclusion that she died from drowning. The following day, the police went to Felix's residence, where they seized his SUV for investigation and analysis, as it was evidently the vehicle used to transport the victim's body. On the evening of May 2nd, Felix turned himself in at the police station with his lawyer and was arrested on charges of kidnapping, auto theft, murder, and the death of an unborn child, since the victim was pregnant with a 1-month-old embryo. The boxer was taken to prison without the option of posting bail to prevent him from fleeing the country. Meanwhile, a few days before his arrest, something unexpected happened. A man named Luis Cadiz contacted lawyers, claiming to be an important witness in the case and in need of their services for his defense. He did not have enough financial resources to pay for legal representation, but what he was about to confess would also implicate himself in the crime. These lawyers wasted no time in contacting the police, stating that they had a client with relevant information in this high-profile case. The witness's only request in exchange for his confession was witness protection, as he knew that Felix had the power and cold-bloodedness to have him killed. It was through Luis Cadiz that authorities learned that Felix Verdejo had not acted alone and that he had an accomplice in carrying out this crime. At this point, the entire population of Puerto Rico was outraged and shocked by how someone like Felix Verdejo, who was a national star, could do something like this to a pregnant woman he supposedly loved. The judicial process. By this stage, authorities had compiled a comprehensive collection of evidence against Felix Verdejo, including his text messages, financial records, and footage from security cameras tracking his SUV around the time of the crime. Verdejo's explanation was that he had planned to meet Kishla but was delayed due to a prolonged training session, resulting in a missed encounter as Kishla had work commitments. Ellis Santiago, who had separated from Verdejo by then, reported that on April 29th, Felix had left early for a run and was out of contact until he returned home the next day to collect clothes before heading to the police station. It wasn't until May 2nd that Ellis herself visited the station, where she was treated as a suspect. Felix later reached out to her, expressing regret for leaving her alone with their daughter and admitting his intention to surrender to the police. He downplayed the situation, claiming it was related to a drug trafficking charge. Ellis, in a distressed state, revealed that she had received multiple threatening messages, accusing her of complicity in Kishla's murder. She was distraught, not with Kishla, but with Felix's actions. Previous messages showed Felix apologizing to Ellis for impregnating Kishla and expressing his desire not to have another child. Adding to the complexities, one of Felix's former partners came forward as a witness. She claimed that in 2013, Felix had coerced her into terminating a pregnancy that occurred during their nearly 5-year relationship. Felix had given her $300 and instructed her to ensure the pregnancy did not continue, even resorting to threats on one occasion. The most startling testimony, however, came from Ricardo Cadiz, the brother of Felix's alleged accomplice. Ricardo had known Felix since the pandemic, having sold him kilos of cocaine. In April 2021, Felix approached Ricardo for pills that could induce an abortion. On the day of Kishla's disappearance, Luis had asked Ricardo to pick him up where he had left Kishla's abandoned car. Ricardo connected the dots when the news reported the discovery of the car at the same location. When confronted, Luis broke down and confessed to being involved in a murder with Felix, although he claimed ignorance of the victim's identity. Following this revelation, Luis asked Ricardo for help in turning himself in because he couldn't bear the weight of what they had done. Ricardo then called the police to report his brother. Finally, the prosecution brought forward Luis Cadiz, who knew exactly what had happened on that Thursday, April 29th. He began by stating that neither of them had a plan in mind to take Kishla's life. He only knew that Felix was truly desperate and willing to do whatever it took to end the victim's pregnancy. Felix promised to pay Luis a large sum of money if he helped. The day before the incident, the two men had gone to Kishla's residence, but she wasn't there, as she had gone to get her nails done, and it was getting late. They drove to the bridge where they finally left her to check the location of the cameras and their surroundings, preparing for their plan the next day with less margin for error. Later that night, they began to plan how they would commit the crime, and the idea of rendering the woman unconscious with a certain substance and then throwing her off the bridge came to mind. Luis provided Felix with a block of cement and a syringe containing a powerful substance. On the fateful day of April 29th, early in the morning, Felix Verdejo sent a message to Kishla, which he later erased, stating, "We're coming for you, Titan." The duo then set off to meet Kishla at a prearranged location. Upon arrival, Felix instructed Kishla to get into the car, but she was taken aback to find Luis already inside, creating a tense atmosphere. Despite her apprehension, Felix reassured her there was nothing to worry about and asked her to give her car keys to Luis. Nervously, Kishla complied, stressing her need to not be late for work. Sensing the imminent danger, Kishla revealed her pregnancy, showing the document as evidence in hopes of evoking some compassion from them. This revelation, however, had no effect. In a sudden and violent turn, Luis grabbed her by the hair, while Felix delivered a punch that knocked her unconscious. Luis then injected Kishla with 2 substances to ensure she remained unconscious, bound her hands and feet with a metal cable and a cement block, and then the men drove to the bridge. There, believing they were unobserved, they threw Kishla's body into Laguna San Jose while she was still alive. Felix, intent on ensuring the body would not be found, armed himself with a gun and instructed Luis to fire into the water, but both shots missed their mark. Luis then drove Kishla's car away to abandon it, and they both worked to clean Felix's SUV to eliminate any evidence. In his defense, Luis Cadiz claimed that he was under the influence of alcohol and other substances during the crime. He expressed his subsequent remorse, considering turning himself in, and painted himself as a victim, citing depression and anxiety. This narrative sought to mitigate his role in the tragic and brutal events of that day. The sentence. Puerto Rican former boxer Felix Verdejo was sentenced to life in prison on November 3, 2023, for crimes related to the kidnapping resulting in the death of Kishla Rodriguez, as well as the involuntary manslaughter of the fetus she was carrying. This sentence marks the end of a tragic and condemnable episode that shocked Puerto Rico and many people worldwide. This is the story of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, 2 best friends from a small town called Cambridgeshire who went missing while they were out to buy sweets from a vending machine. And as the killer was revealed, the case of the 10-year-olds shocked the whole British nation because the abductor was found to be one of the closest people to the best friends. On the evening of Sunday, August 4, 2002, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman went out to buy sweets in Soham, Cambridgeshire. That morning, Jessica left her home to attend a barbecue at Holly's house. Holly, Jessica, and a third friend named Natalie Parr played computer games and listened to music until Natalie left. The girls changed into matching Manchester United football kits in the afternoon, and Holly's mother took the last picture of them. At 6:15, they left the house without telling anyone to buy sweets from a vending machine at the local sports center. But the 10-year-olds never made it back home. At 8 p.m., Holly's mother noticed that despite being told to stay in the house, the kids had sneaked out. She waited for them to return home, as the vending machine wasn't far from the house. But the children didn't return and it got dark. She and a few of her friends went out to search for them. But to their disappointment, they couldn't find the kids in the neighborhood. Holly's mother reported the 2 friends missing at 9:55 p.m. Back then, they didn't know that the search for the kids would lead them to the worst-case scenario. The police started a massive search for the girls, and 400 police officers and hundreds of volunteers looked for them in Operation Fincham. They conducted house-to-house inquiries, and even the United States Air Force personnel stationed at nearby air bases helped in the search. As both girls were taught to be wary of strangers, the police thought that the kidnapper must be someone the Wells and Chapman families were acquainted with. On August 17, 2002, almost 2 weeks after the girls went missing, Keith Pryor, a gamekeeper, discovered the girls' bodies in an irrigation ditch near the perimeter fence of RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, about 10 miles east of Soham. Their bodies were found in an advanced state of decomposition, as the killer had attempted to burn them. They were later correctly identified as Holly and Jessica through DNA testing. The authorities immediately began an investigation to catch their killer, and their prime suspect was their school caretaker, Ian Huntley. After the girls' disappearance, Huntley, then 28 years old, was among those who made media appeals for their safe return. He even told journalists that he was one of the last people to see them alive. The police began to suspect Huntley after an officer searched his home on August 5th. The officer noted that it had been thoroughly cleaned and that clothing was on the washing line despite it having rained during the past couple of days. An eyewitness also said that he saw Huntley and Carr, his girlfriend, who worked as an assistant at the same school, peering into the boot of their car, looking distressed, and that the car had been weeping. In addition to this, Huntley had even asked a police officer how long DNA lasted. On August 16, 2002, a day before the girls' bodies were found, Huntley and Carr were questioned by the police. They were interrogated separately for approximately 7 hours. By that time, locals from his hometown of Grimsby had recognized him in televised appearances as being linked to a sex attack on a woman. It later emerged that before moving to Cambridgeshire, Huntley had previously been investigated for rape and sexual assault involving underage girls. This is somebody that history has shown got away with lying for a long time and got away with being abusive for a long time, claimed the authorities. Jessica's mobile phone signal was last registered to a mast outside Huntley's house. Carr slipped up in the details of the false alibi she gave to police. She had actually been with her mother in Grimsby at the time of the girl's disappearance. The girl's clothes were found partially burned and dumped in a bin at the school where Huntley worked. The bin had his fingerprints on it as well. It also emerged that Huntley's car had been cleaned, and all 4 tires were replaced the day after the murder. Huntley had also paid the mechanic to forge the date on the receipt to make it look like they were changed earlier. A forensic psychologist, Carrie Danes, claimed that Huntley had been planning this attack for some time. The authorities believe that Huntley was confident about not getting caught for his deeds. I think people who get away with that kind of behavior believe that they won't be caught. So, they have a certain level of confidence when they tell their lies, stated one of the officials. Huntley and Carr were first questioned by the police and then later arrested on suspicion of abduction and murder. On December 17, 2003, Huntley was found guilty on 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years. He is serving his sentence at HMP Franklin Prison in County Durham. Carr was charged with perverting the course of justice on August 21, 2002. On January 16, 2003, she was charged with 2 counts of assisting an offender. She pleaded guilty to the first charge and not guilty to the second. She was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison and was released on probation on May 14, 2004 after serving 21 months, which was half her sentence. She won an injunction on February 24, 2005 granting her lifelong anonymity on the grounds that her life would otherwise be in danger. In 2011, Carr gave birth to her first child with her new husband. The anonymity order extends to include the child so that he or she should never know their mother's previous identity. This is the case of a 25-year-old Janet Abaroa who was discovered dead in her North Carolina home, and her family suspected her husband's involvement. For the lack of direct evidence, the case went cold for years, leaving Janet's family without closure and potentially putting another woman in danger. The question in the minds of authorities was, where were her contact lenses? On April 26, 2005, Raven Abaroa, 20, reported to police that he had come home at 10 p.m. to find his wife, Janet Abaroa, dead. She'd been shot by something. "There's blood everywhere," he said on the 911 call. He had returned from a game of soccer that evening. As the police arrived at the scene, they saw Janet lying dead on the bed. She had stab wounds on her body, and their 6-month-old son was safe and unaware in the next room. Raven told the police that when he left, his wife was in bed watching TV. The couple, who were both raised in the Church of Latter-day Saints, had spent time together before the game with a friend. Janet's body was immediately sent for an autopsy, which revealed that she had been stabbed multiple times, not shot, and it also showed that she was pregnant with Raven's second child. Janet was the 7th of 10 siblings. She grew up in a Mormon family. She met Raven Abaroa, who was also a Mormon, in 1998 at Southern Virginia University, where she played soccer as well. He was a fellow soccer player who instantly swept her off her feet. In August 2000, after 2 years together, Janet and Raven Abaroa married at the Mormon Temple in Washington, D.C. They settled in southeastern Virginia. Her friends and family thought that life for the newlywed couple was perfect. Shortly after his wife's death, Raven Abaroa moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, with their son. With the prime suspicion on the husband, Raven Abaroa, the police began investigating the case in search of Janet's killer. There were a lot of reasons for police to suspect Abaroa of killing his wife, including a $500,000 life insurance policy and a suspiciously missing knife collection. But Raven also seemed to have an airtight alibi. A friend of his testified in support of Raven's claim of being at the soccer game. For 5 years, Abaroa evaded arrest on the basis of that alibi. In February 2008, he remarried Vanessa Pond in Salt Lake City. Vanessa was a single mother whose daughter was in the same daycare program as Abaroa's son, Caden. She found Raven upfront, honest and genuine, and admired the fact that he was a single father looking after his kids single-handedly. Soon, they decided to move in together. It was not long before Vanessa found out that she had been wrong in her opinion about Raven. She started seeing abrupt changes in the behavior of her new husband. As Vanessa learned about his wife's death, she went online to find out more about the death of Janet Abaroa. He had his stories about how people were trying to frame him, about how horrible the cops were, and how he continued to try to contact the police to find out what was going on, stated Vanessa. 3 years after Janet Abaroa's death remained unsolved, Vanessa and Raven Abaroa were married in the backyard of her parents' home. When Janet Abaroa's sisters learned he was engaged, they said they felt they had to reach out to his new fiancé. "We just wanted her to make sure she was aware of the things that had been in the news about him, that she would know what she was getting into because we were fearful for her," said Janet's sister, Dana Kendall. Not long after this, Pond said Raven Abaroa began acting in ways she didn't understand. She said that he would switch within moments and would utter the most horrible things, but the very next moment he would apologize. Vanessa Pond claimed that the outburst had become very physical. "He grabbed me from the door and threw me up against the wall, and when I fell, he tried to convince me that I had tripped," said Vanessa. At this point in the story enters a new detective and a question of a missing contact lens, and these elements would give it a breakthrough twist. Just 4 months into Vanessa and Raven's marriage, Vanessa claimed that she feared for her safety. The couple separated, and the marriage was annulled. Vanessa went public in the spring of 2009 with her fears that he killed his first wife. The Durham police assigned a new detective to Janet Abaroa's case, Detective Sully. Sully believed that Raven never kept his lies straight and that his initial statements to law enforcement were contradictory. Then, as he was reviewing the crime scene photos, Sully noticed something that stuck out to him as odd. He saw the contact lens case on the counter with the top off of it, indicating that the contacts were probably not in there, which would be contrary to her going to bed, as Raven claimed she had. This detail caught the eye of the detective because, from the interviews of Janet Abaroa's family and friends, he knew that Janet was consistent with removing her contacts before going to sleep. The detective said that he found this detail suspicious enough to go after Raven. For Sully, another piece of evidence that hinted toward Raven's guilt was the fact that there was no disturbance based on the manner of her death because a stabbing is not immediate, and it's usually violent with struggle and disturbance. The detective managed to obtain an arrest warrant for Raven, and he was arrested on February 1st, 2010. He was charged with first-degree murder in the death of his first wife. In July 2010, Janet Abaroa's body was exhumed, and authorities determined that she had been wearing contacts when she was buried. Apparently, this evidence was crucial in determining a flaw in Raven Abaroa's story. It was not long after this when Raven Abaroa went on trial and faced his second wife in court. During his trial, which began in 2013, prosecutors presented Raven Abaroa as a controlling husband. Vanessa, who testified as a witness for the prosecution, detailed how she saw Raven Abaroa become violent on the soccer field and how his aggression turned on her. "When he sees weakness, he just comes at you harder and harder," Vanessa said in court. On the other hand, Raven's defense team argued that the prosecution's evidence against their client was mostly circumstantial and that police had ignored evidence, including a bloody shoe print that they said could have pointed to a different killer. In May 2013, the jury failed to reach a verdict, deadlocking 11-1 on a guilty verdict, and the judge declared a mistrial. Before Raven Abaroa's second trial was supposed to begin in March 2014, he entered an Alford plea for voluntary manslaughter, acknowledging that there was evidence to convict him but not admitting guilt. A judge sentenced him to between 95 and 123 months in jail, but he was granted credit for the 4 years he had spent behind bars before and during his trial, which was applied as time served. Raven Abaroa did not testify at his trial, but he spoke in court in 2014 after being sentenced. "I don't think it's worth risking the possibility of spending the rest of my life in prison for something I did not do. I take this plea to ensure that doesn't happen. And that's the only reason. I didn't kill my wife," said Raven Abaroa. He was 39 when he was released from prison on Christmas Day in 2017. He now lives in Utah, while his second wife continues to go out in public, cautioning people about Raven. Vanessa said that her advice for other women who might meet Abaroa is to stay away from him. I was shocked, but more than that, I was shocked at what the plea deal turned out to be. That's not justice at all. It's not justice, said Vanessa in a public interview. What do you guys think? Is Vanessa right in her claims about justice not being served? Was this really one of those cases where the law is manipulated to serve the culprit's purpose, and the victim is left without justice? Did Raven actually kill his wife? Also, what about those contact lenses? Were they real? Let us know in the comments. Born on April 8, 1974 in the heart of Odessa, Texas, Christopher Kyle grew up as the oldest child in a family deeply rooted in Catholic values and a love for rural life. His childhood was spent in the vast Texan fields, where he embraced activities like playing cowboy and caring for livestock. On his 8th birthday, Christopher received a quintessentially Texan gift from his father, a Springfield rifle, a model highly esteemed by the American military for its superior build and reliability since its introduction by Winchester in 1906. This rifle not only remained a military staple until the late 1970s, but also gained fame among gun enthusiasts. Christopher cherished this gift. Under his father's guidance, he learned the intricacies of firearm maintenance, handling, and marksmanship, quickly applying his skills to hunting small animals like turkeys. Observing his son's growing passion for hunting and firearms, his father gifted him a shotgun, which Christopher later used for deer hunting with his brother. Graduating from high school in 1992, Christopher set his sights on a career in bronco rodeo, an endeavor that involved mastering the art of horseback riding in rodeo events. He aspired to balance this profession with studying ranch and livestock management in college. True to his Texan roots, Christopher showed great promise, but a severe arm injury from a horse riding accident forced him to undergo reconstructive surgery, effectively ending his rodeo ambitions. With his cowboy dreams behind him, Christopher sought new paths. His affinity for hunting and shooting, combined with a deep sense of patriotism, guided him toward a military career. Initially considering the Navy, Christopher's encounter with a recruiter who recognized his unique skill set led to a pivotal decision. To apply for the Navy SEALs, the U.S. Navy's elite special operations force known for their rigorous selection process and deployment in diverse missions such as direct action operations, reconnaissance, unconventional warfare, hostage rescue, and counterterrorism. The SEALs training prepares them to excel in any environment, from sea to land and sky, and is a challenge that few can meet, as Christopher would soon discover. Christopher Kyle's innate modesty was such that his superiors had to persuade him that he indeed possessed skills befitting a Navy SEAL. Embracing this new challenge, Christopher embarked on a journey to meet the stringent requirements of the SEALs. His determination bore fruit, and at 24, he enlisted on August 5, 1998. The following year marked the beginning of his rigorous training, where he refined his military skills. Despite his dedication and preparedness, Christopher's initial application to join the SEALs was rejected, not for a lack of skill or discipline, but due to a previous arm surgery. Yet, Christopher and those who knew him were convinced of his potential to excel as a Navy SEAL. Recognizing his unique abilities, he was invited the next year to undertake a demanding 24-week course named Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL, BUD/S, training at Coronado, California. In March 2001, he successfully completed this specialized training, earning his place in Class 233 as a Special Operations Soldier at the Coronado base. That year, Christopher's personal life flourished alongside his professional achievements. He met Taya, a woman whose striking black hair and intense gaze immediately captivated him. Their connection was instant, leading to a marriage in February 2002, with Taya adopting the surname Kyle. Together, they would go on to have 2 children. At this point, Christopher's life was thriving both personally and professionally, having achieved his dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. Fueled by his unwavering patriotism, he aspired to contribute further to his country by participating in the Navy SEALs' most challenging operations, reserved for the highest-ranking and most skilled soldiers. Christopher's aspirations materialized when, after completing his training, his team was chosen as one of the first to be deployed in a significant and tumultuous conflict, the initial U.S. invasion of Iraq, which eventually escalated into the Iraq War. The call to action for his platoon came at the start of February 2003. On this battleground, Christopher would carve his place in history, showcasing his exceptional abilities and determination, earning the admiration of his peers, superiors, and ultimately recognition as an American hero for his contributions and bravery in a challenging and pivotal period. Throughout his military training, Christopher dedicated himself to mastering a variety of military rifles, learning the intricacies of each. He held a particular fondness for the Winchester Magnum sniper rifle, stating it was the only one he valued as highly as the Springfield his father had gifted him. His exceptional marksmanship, honed through years of amateur hunting, led to his role as a support sniper in his platoon, responsible for reconnaissance and troop deployment. In this crucial position, he was entrusted with the safety and lives of many. During the U.S. invasion of Iraq, Christopher's unit was among the first to arrive at the onset of Operation Iraqi Freedom in March 2003. By the end of the month, they had established their position in a small town near Nasiriyah. As they awaited Marine reinforcements, Christopher and his fellow soldiers maintained vigilance from a building's vantage point. While most local residents remained indoors, observing the American soldiers cautiously, a woman with several children approached the soldiers on the street. Suddenly, she reached into her bag, pulling out a yellowish object, seemingly ignoring the children. "It's a grenade, shoot!" commanded Christopher's superior from their lookout. Hesitant at first, Christopher complied with the repeated order and fired twice. This harrowing moment marked the first time he had to make such a grave decision, taking a life that was neither that of a combatant nor a man, profoundly impacting his perspective on the realities of war. In time, Christopher documented his military experiences, particularly grappling with the deep-seated animosity toward the enemy that developed from that first encounter and intensified throughout his tours in Iraq. "I deeply despise the malevolence that woman harbored. My loathing for her persists. It was an obligation I had to fulfill. I harbor no regret. My actions safeguarded numerous American lives, which undoubtedly held greater value than hers," he expressed in his writings, reflecting on the complexities and moral dilemmas faced in the line of duty. In the wake of his initial exposure to war, Christopher consistently established himself as a proficient and dependable sniper. His acts of valor in various operations were widely talked about among his fellow soldiers, and his reputation for bravery began to gain recognition among higher-ranking officers. After his initial mission, Christopher returned 3 additional times to Iraq, each time playing a vital role in his platoon and successfully completing numerous missions. His repeated deployments were notable, especially considering the challenging nature of his first experience in combat. Unlike many who were reluctant to return to the battlefield, Christopher went back several times, driven not by a fondness for war but by his deep love and sense of duty toward his country. This commitment was particularly poignant considering the still fresh memories of the September 11th attacks. Among the many feats in his career, one particular instance stood out where Christopher accomplished what was arguably one of the most remarkable sniper shots recorded in military history. During a mission in Baghdad, he and his team managed to locate and eliminate a hostile target who had been attacking and evading their platoon. The extraordinary aspect of this shot was its distance, approximately 2 kilometers away, a testament to his exceptional ability. In line with military protocol, after each combat mission, Christopher was required to submit detailed reports of his actions and the outcomes, including the enemy casualties he was responsible for. These reports, however, only accounted for confirmed kills, as verification required corroboration by another soldier. Despite this, the unconfirmed kills were not insignificant in number. From an official standpoint, the Pentagon acknowledged over 150 enemy deaths in Christopher's military record. Nevertheless, Christopher himself estimated that the actual number of fatalities he caused ranged between 250 and 300, spanning his 4 deployments in Iraq from February 2003 to February 2009. "I have been credited by the Navy for more sniper kills than any other American service member, past or present," The actual count varies. One day it's 160. Another day it might be more or less. The true figure? That's something you might need to ask the Navy for, and they might just tell you on a good day. Christopher reflected on his service record. The Pentagon and the military, as Christopher often pointed out, were typically reticent about divulging the full details of the events in Iraq. Consequently, many of the accounts of what transpired came from the soldiers themselves. One such account was shared by a former ranger who served in Iraq alongside Christopher. He recalled an incident where two Iraqi informants working for the U.S. were fleeing for their lives after being identified by al-Qaeda operatives. As they neared Christopher's platoon, they were frantically signaling their dire situation. Contrary to expectations of an impending firefight, Christopher, assessing the situation, scaled a palm tree with his rifle. From this vantage point, he precisely eliminated two al-Qaeda members with just 2 shots, causing the others to retreat, unsure of the origin of the deadly fire. Such incidents underscored Christopher's extraordinary marksmanship and the trust his comrades placed in him. Christopher often reminisced about another remarkable incident involving 2 Iraqi insurgents fleeing on a motorcycle. Displaying his exceptional skills, he calmly aimed and neutralized both with a single bullet from a considerable distance. This feat, while seemingly straightforward to those familiar with action movies or video games, is incredibly rare and demonstrates a profound understanding of both firearms and marksmanship. However, Christopher's experiences in Iraq were not without their share of trauma. On one occasion, while setting up an American guard post at the top of a building, they came under enemy fire from multiple directions. In the ensuing chaos, one of Christopher's teammates, operating an M16 machine gun, returned fire indiscriminately. Hostile shots struck the machine gun, causing it to malfunction and explode, sending shrapnel flying. This shrapnel severely injured Ryan, a fellow platoon member and close comrade of Christopher's, resulting in disfigurement and the loss of his eyesight. Despite surviving this incident and receiving commendations for his service, Ryan tragically passed away due to complications from subsequent reconstructive surgery. Following this harrowing event, Christopher and his platoon were forced to retreat to a nearby U.S. military outpost. Later, with reinforcements and armored infantry tanks, they returned to the original site. Upon their arrival, they were immediately met with a barrage of enemy fire. Christopher and a group of soldiers sought refuge in a nearby building, taking cover at the base of a staircase. Among them was Mark, a young soldier on his first deployment in Iraq, under Christopher's command. Tasked with ascending the stairs for reconnaissance, he was struck by a bullet as he turned to relay information to his team, dying instantly. In the heat of battle, his fellow soldiers, including Christopher, had to press on, facing the enemy while bearing the weight of their comrades' loss. Amidst the turmoil, Christopher and his platoon successfully secured the outpost. The day's events resulted in a single casualty within their ranks, deeply impacting Christopher. The loss of his comrade not only intensified his animosity toward the enemy, but also left him grappling with a sense of despair. His wife later reflected on how he was continually tormented by memories of those he couldn't save, despite the numerous lives he had preserved. These harrowing experiences from the battlefield lingered with him, disturbing his sleep and mental peace for years to come. During his service, Christopher's reputation as a soldier of extraordinary capability flourished. His peers and superiors dubbed him the Legend or the Terminator, recognizing his unparalleled skill and effectiveness. Nevertheless, all chapters must close, and in February 2009, Christopher made the decision to retire, stepping away from his role as a sniper. His decision was met with respect from the U.S. military, which honored him with an honorable discharge and multiple commendations, including 4 Bronze Stars and 2 Silver Stars for valor. Christopher's decision to retire stemmed from a desire to preserve his marriage and find peace with his family. Back home, he took on a new role as the president of a private company offering tactical and military training to both the U.S. military and other law enforcement agencies. In 2012, he seized the opportunity to share his journey as a Marine and Navy SEAL by penning his own book. The publication, titled American Sniper, resonated with the public's growing interest in the personal stories and challenges faced by military personnel. His autobiography quickly garnered widespread attention, elevating Christopher to the status of a national hero and a survivor of war's infernal trials. His media appearances, discussing his book and experiences, catapulted him to fame, with the book sales skyrocketing, remaining on the New York Times bestseller list for 37 consecutive weeks. In one of his television interviews, Christopher revealed that at one point, every sniper casualty in Iraq was attributed to him, leading Iraqi insurgents to place a $20,000 bounty on his head. Despite the accolades and recognition, his story did not have a fairy tale ending. Suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, Christopher battled the invisible scars left by the war. He was haunted by insomnia and vivid nightmares, often feeling like he was being pursued by an unseen enemy. His commitment to helping fellow veterans led him to collaborate with a nonprofit organization, launching the Heroes Project. This initiative focused on providing comprehensive support to veterans, including gym facilities, personalized training programs, therapy, and assistance for those with combat-related disabilities and trauma. Unfortunately, it was his dedication to this cause that ultimately led to his tragic and untimely demise. Toward the end of 2013, Christopher was approached for assistance by a woman whose younger daughter was a schoolmate of his children. She was familiar with Christopher's military background and his commitment to helping fellow veterans. She expressed concern about her son, Eddie Ray Routh, a 25-year-old Iraq War veteran battling PTSD. Eddie's struggles were compounded by a schizophrenia diagnosis and frequent admissions to psychiatric facilities over the past 2 years. He had even expressed to his mother auditory hallucinations and suicidal thoughts. Eddie, born in September 1987, had harbored ambitions of joining the Marine Corps since his teenage years, a dream he realized after high school graduation. His deployment to Iraq in September 2007 placed him near Baghdad, where he served as a prison guard and weapons repairman for 6 months. He later participated in a humanitarian mission in Haiti in January 2010 before receiving an honorable discharge from the military the following year. Upon hearing Eddie's plight, Christopher reassured his mother, promising to engage her son in a calming activity and have a talk with him. Unbeknownst to his mother, Christopher's plan involved taking Eddie to a shooting range, an approach that had previously shown positive results with other veterans suffering from trauma. Yet, this choice of therapy would prove perilous with Eddie. On the fateful afternoon of February 2, 2013, Christopher, accompanied by a fellow former SEAL and close friend, 35-year-old Chad Littlefield, drove to Eddie's residence in his truck. Eddie joined them in the truck, exhibiting signs of unrest during the drive. Despite their apprehension, the two men continued to the Rough Creek Ranch shooting range in Texas. En route, Christopher texted Chad about Eddie's erratic behavior, prompting Chad to request vigilance for any potential threat. As they prepared for shooting at the range, Christopher and Chad, with their backs turned and unaware of the impending danger, were suddenly ambushed by Eddie. Seizing 2 pistols from the trunk of the truck, Eddie ruthlessly opened fire. Following the attack, Eddie took the keys to Christopher's truck and nonchalantly proceeded to buy burritos at a nearby Taco Bell. He then visited his sister's house, eerily admitting to driving a vehicle belonging to a deceased individual and recounting the events with a detached demeanor. Shocked and uncertain, his sister contacted the authorities, reporting the possibility of a delusional episode given Eddie's mental state. The events that unfolded were not a figment of imagination but a stark and tragic reality. Chad Littlefield had been struck by 7 bullets, 4 of which were instantly fatal. One shot, located at the upper part of his head, indicated that Eddie had come dangerously close before firing, with the final shot likely delivered as Littlefield lay on the ground. Christopher Kyle suffered 6 gunshot wounds at close range, including a deadly one that penetrated his ear, leading to immediate death. This heart-wrenching incident brought an abrupt and tragic end to the life of a hero who had dedicated himself to aiding fellow veterans in their post-war lives and had sought a tranquil existence with his family after his own turbulent experiences in combat. Before law enforcement could reach Eddie's sister's home to apprehend him, he had already departed, eventually heading to his own residence. There, local police intercepted and arrested him. During the arrest, Eddie was raving incoherently about apocalyptic themes, leading to his charge for capital murder. In the face of national shock and outrage, his bail was set at $3 million. The trial commenced in February 2015. During the trial, Eddie's defense team argued that he was in a state of insanity at the time of the murders. However, the prosecution's forensic psychologist cast doubt on this, suggesting Eddie might have been mimicking symptoms of schizophrenia and that his behavior could be attributed to a personality disorder exacerbated by drug misuse. The expert also suggested that his psychotic symptoms were more likely linked to substance abuse than to his wartime experiences. As a result, on February 24, 2015, following a 2-week trial, Eddie was convicted for the murders of Christopher Kyle and Chad Littlefield, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. When queried about his motives for the killings, Eddie chillingly responded that he had acted because the victims weren't communicating with him. In 2015, Christopher Kyle's life and legacy were further immortalized through a film directed by Clint Eastwood. Based on his autobiography, American Sniper, the film incorporated fictional elements for dramatic effect. This cinematic portrayal brought renewed attention to his remarkable story. In honor of his memory and service, Texas established February 2nd as Chris Kyle Day, a tribute to the American hero. Rod Farrell was a 16-year-old boy from Murray, Kentucky, whose delusions led him to lead a ritualistic cult and brutally murder a 14-year-old member's parents in their home. He became the youngest to be on death row until his sentence was reduced to life prison with no parole. But to understand the story and make some sense of it, you need to know the events in the history from where he wasn't even born. And to convince yourself that this story is real, you need to follow Rod's life from his early childhood. Roderick did not have an easy life growing up. He was born to his then 16-year-old mom, Sandra Gibson, on March 28, 1980 in Murray. His father abandoned him to serve in the military and was never a part of his life. His maternal grandfather allegedly sexually abused him when he was around 5 years old. However, no criminal charges against the grandfather were ever pursued. Sandra and Rod did not have a stable home life, bouncing back and forth between living with Sandra's parents and public housing. Sandra worked as an exotic dancer and sex worker to make ends meet. She introduced Rod to vampires and the macabre from a young age. They bonded over Dracula films and Vampire: The Masquerade comic books. Sandra was far from an ideal mother and had a questionable and complex relationship with her son. At the age of 34, she was even caught writing disturbing love letters to a 14-year-old boy. "I long to be near you, for your embrace. Yes, to become a vampire, a part of the family, immortal and truly yours forever. I only hope that one day you will once again return to Murray. You will then come for me and cross me over, and I will be your bride for eternity and you my sire," wrote Sandra Gibson in the letter. The rest of the Vampire Clan's members came from equally depressing and disturbing situations. The most notable members were Scott Anderson, Rod's right-hand man, Chastity Kesey, his then 16-year-old girlfriend, Dana Cooper, a friend for the ride, and Heather Windorf, Rod's damsel in distress and who also turned out to be the victim ahead in the story. All of them took comfort in being able to belong to a group of outsiders and like-minded people while growing up in a place that is generally unaccepting of anything non-traditional. The gang's meet-up spot was called the Vampire Hotel. It was a dilapidated structure in the middle of the woods near Kentucky Lake in the land between the lakes. It was here the Clan threw parties, used psychedelic drugs, and took part in various types of rituals. Hearing stories from Heather about suffering abuse at the hands of her father struck a chord with Rod. After Heather had to move away, Rod became obsessed with the situation and ended up racking up hundreds of dollars in long-distance phone bills for Heather's family. The final straw for Roderick was when Heather's parents finally cut her off from the phone. It was then he rallied his group to go on the fateful rescue mission to save Heather from her parents and run away to New Orleans to start their very own unique vampire family and live happily ever after. Unfortunately, things did not go according to the plan. On November 25, 1996, Rod and the gang made the 750-mile drive from Murray, Kentucky to Eustis, Florida. After she had been picked up and their vehicle had broken down, Heather made a deal with Rod in which she would use her keys to unlock her home so that her family's vehicle could be stolen and the clan could complete their trip to New Orleans. In exchange, Rod agreed to perform the turning ritual in which she would consume his blood and officially be a vampire forever. The ritual took place early that morning in a Eustis cemetery. Rod consumed a significant amount of LSD before Heather admitted to drinking Roderick's blood from a self-inflicted razor blade wound. Shortly after that, the group departed to retrieve the car from Heather's house. Upon arriving at the Windorf residence, Roderick and Scott entered the house through the garbage to find Mr. Windorf peacefully resting on the living room couch. After many moments of silence and deliberation, Mr. Windorf awoke to his skull being violently smashed in by Roderick and the crowbar Rod had brought in with him. Mr. Windorf suffered from more than 22 blows to his face. Hearing the noisy disturbance, Mrs. Windorf entered the living room from the kitchen. She was struck and left horrified at the sight of her husband being beaten to death by intruders. In an attempt to interrupt the despicable act, she splashed scalding hot coffee on the face of Roderick, who retaliated with a crowbar blow to her face. The blow was so hard that it severed her brainstem and killed her instantly. By that time, it was pretty obvious. I had blood on me and a crowbar in my hand. I was fixing to say, "Yeah, I want to have coffee with you, son of a bitching smartass." But anyway, then that's when she lunged at me. I just took the bottom of the crowbar and kept stabbing it through her skull, and whenever she fell down, I just continually beat her until I saw her brains falling on the floor because that pissed me off, said Roderick about the killing. Afterward, Roderick and Scott proceeded to ritualistically burn their victims and dance around their bodies as they lay dying on the living room floor. Before leaving, they stole valuables such as jewelry and credit cards and eventually left in the family's Ford Explorer. The bodies were later discovered by Heather's 17-year-old sister, Jennifer. She had returned home from work that night. On the other hand, Heather assumed that everything had gone according to the plan, and she was unaware of her parents being murdered until later when she was informed by the vampire gang. Murder warrants were put out for the group of teens on November 27th, and after 4 days of evading the law enforcement and after they tracked a phone call made by Chastity when she had called her grandparents asking for money, the vampire gang was finally captured on November 28th. At first, Roderick completely denied the accusations, claiming he was being framed by a rival vampire gang. But eventually, with an overwhelming amount of evidence piled against him, he pleaded guilty. He received 2 charges of first-degree murder, robbery, and burglary, and was sentenced to death. This made him the youngest American to ever be on death row. Scott Anderson received 2 life sentences in prison. The amount of his involvement in the murders came under question, though he claims that he never touched Mr. or Mrs. Windorf and attempted to calm a raging Roderick, who proceeded to go crazy and bash their skulls in with a crowbar. Charity Kessie and Dana Cooper made plea deals in exchange for reduced sentences. Charity was sentenced to 10 years in prison and Dana for 17. They were later released from prison in February 2008 and 2015, respectively. Scott's sentence was recently changed in 2018 to 40 years, crediting the 22 years he has already spent in prison. By the time Scott Anderson will be released in February 1932, he will be 51 years old. In February, Roderick Farrell's death sentence was changed to life prison after the Florida Supreme Court ruled defendants must be 17 years old or older at the time charges are filed in order to be able to get executed. To this day, Roderick remains at the Tomoka Correctional Institution serving out his life sentence. But the story does not end here. Rather, it's the beginning of scandalous revelations into the world of goths and vampires made by Roderick himself during and after his trial. Roderick was interviewed and questioned by people from several professional backgrounds. Lawyers, journalists, reporters, writers, filmmakers, and even TV show creators wanted some parts of the story from Roderick. Everybody wanted to know how this criminal vampire cult went on with his operations, what rituals they believed in and carried out. How could something this unusual and strange be a reality of their surroundings? Everyone wanted to know everything about this case, and with time, the insights and information revealed into the mind of a vampire were monstrous. Frank Stanfield, the veteran reporter, revealed that at one time, Rod actually believed that he was a vampire. Frank adds to this, saying that in a lot of cases, He was fascinated with the gothic vamp lifestyle and convinced all those other members of the cult. He was able to manipulate other people to join his group because they were fascinated by whatever he said. Even before police began searching for Farrell and the others after the gruesome double murder, the so-called vampire had already been under investigation. According to court documents from the time, Farrell had apparently once forced his way into an animal shelter in Murray, Kentucky. Once inside, he allegedly proceeded to attack dozens of dogs, killing 2 and injuring another so badly that it had to be euthanized. Perhaps the most bizarre aspect of the case was the fact that Farrell believed he was a 500-year-old vampire named Verdejo. Farrell claimed he was part of a vampire cult and that the other members were part of a unique brotherhood. Farrell became obsessed with role-playing games at a young age. When he began playing Vampire the Masquerade with like-minded individuals, he developed a fascination with the idea of vampirism. By the time he was 16, Farrell had become a highly destructive young man. The teenager was not just using drugs but had turned his bedroom into a shrine occult. Court documents claimed he had been observed taking part in satanic rituals and self-harm, going as far as to carve an upside-down cross onto his own chest. Everything I was listening to was dark. It was based upon hate, war, death, pain. That's all my music, all my movies that I watched. My bedroom was an array of the darker side of the occult, such as the Necronomicon, the Satanic Bible. I had upside-down crosses. I had broken shards of glass laying about in the corner. I had hooks and metal cables wrapped around looking like Hellraiser, said Farrell in an interview with Crime Watch Daily. If this couldn't be any more disturbing, Gibson, Farrell's mother, was charged with soliciting rape and soliciting sodomy on November 12, 1996. Gibson sent sexually explicit letters to a 14-year-old Jamie. Jamie's mother pressed charges after her son showed her the letters. She also found out that Gibson set up a shrine in her home with pictures of Jamie, candles, and incense. According to a December 2019 Daily Commercial article, Farrell made a tearful apology to the victims' families. While incarcerated, Farrell took some classes and got a wastewater treatment license. Gibson said that a lot of women write to him. He's been married and divorced during the course of his imprisonment. His current fiancée showed up at one hearing. She said that if released, she would take Farrell in and help him find a job. Gibson said that she was living with her mother, started a jewelry business, and is even considering attending church. Her father, Farrell's grandfather who assaulted him, has dementia and is living in a facility. As I've gotten older, I've learned that it's very important to live a decent life. You can really make a difference, stated Gibson. Mental health experts later testified in the resentencing hearing of Farrell that he is not a vampire cult leader anymore and he has changed. Psychologists claim that Farrell was gang raped by his grandfather and his friends. Gibson's older sister testified during the trial in 1998 that her father had sexually abused both her and Gibson as well. Experts claim that Farrell was a child turned into a monster, that he was immature and still growing. Still, they add, it was no excuse for such criminal acts. Psychologist Heather Holmes testified that Gibson confronted the homeowner where the rape took place with 5-year-old Farrell by her side. She thought she was sticking up for her son, but it re-traumatized him, Holmes said. It's truly terrifying what people are capable of. What do you guys think? Would Roderick have committed these terrible deeds had he not been subject to so much trauma and torment? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Oakley Carlson's journey began on December 6, 2016, in Oakville, Washington, but her upbringing was far from ordinary. She came from a family facing numerous challenges. Her parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carson, had their fair share of troubles. Andrew had a brief stint as a police officer, but got dismissed due to misconduct, although it didn't lead to any criminal charges. On the other hand, Jordan had a history marked by serious drug and theft-related offenses, and both grappled with substance abuse. Their family had been under scrutiny since 2013 due to various complaints about how they were raising their children. In August 2017, Jordan initiated a crowdfunding campaign in a bid to gather support for hiring a lawyer. Child Protective Services had taken custody of their children following a report that they weren't providing proper medical care to one of their daughters who had health issues affecting her growth and weight. During that same period, 8-month-old Oakley found herself in the care of Eric and Jamie Jo Hiles. The Hiles were caring school teachers who had a deep longing to become parents. Their journey to become Oakley's foster parents began when a former student of theirs informed them that the granddaughter of his hairdresser needed a foster home and would eventually be put up for adoption. He suggested that they offer a loving home, and they wholeheartedly agreed. As Oakley grew, she blossomed into a joyful child who loved to bring smiles to everyone around her. Her passion for dancing led to her enrollment in dance classes. She also possessed an extraordinary ability to memorize stories and was exceptionally bright, radiating love in the Hiles' home. Jamie and Eric were always honest with Oakley, explaining that although she didn't come from Jamie's belly, she came from her heart. The couple cherished her deeply and had dreams of adopting her. However, in October 2019, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families made the difficult decision that Oakley should return to live with her biological family, despite the Hiles' concerns. In November 2019, just a week shy of her 3rd birthday, Oakley bid farewell to Jamie and Eric, returning to live with Jordan, Andrew, and her siblings. Jamie later shared in an interview the heart-wrenching experience of letting go of Oakley on the day before Thanksgiving dinner. It was a tearful farewell filled with uncertainty about whether they'd ever have the chance to see her again. They remained vigilant about Oakley's well-being, as they had lingering concerns about Jordan and Andrew's ability to care for and protect her. Regrettably, the concerns of Oakley's foster parents were not unfounded. In 2020, Oakley spent Christmas with her paternal grandparents, who were deeply alarmed by her condition. She had developed noticeable dark circles under her eyes, had sores on her face, and appeared pale and bruised. Worry for her safety and well-being. The grandparents reached out to Child Protective Services, but it seemed that their report only ignited a significant family dispute. Following that disturbing incident, Andrew's parents had no further contact with Oakley or her parents. Nearly a year later, on November 6, 2021, just before 5 p.m., Andrew contacted the authorities to report a house fire that had occurred earlier that same day. According to his account, Oakley accidentally set the sofa on fire while playing with a lighter. Andrew explained that he and his wife had battled the flames for 4 hours, but despite their best efforts, the fire had spread to the 2nd floor of their home. This raised eyebrows among the firefighters, primarily due to the considerable delay between the start of the fire and its reporting. Andrew attributed the delay to the chaotic situation, as neither he nor his wife could locate their cell phones to call for assistance. Given the inconsistencies in the information provided, officials launched a thorough investigation into the incident. Their findings revealed that the fire had actually originated in the microwave, contradicting the initial report of the sofa being the source of the blaze. In the aftermath of the fire, a close family friend organized an online fundraiser explaining that the fire had devastated the upper part of their house, resulting in the loss of most of their belongings. Several days later, Jessica, the local school director, whose daughter was friends with one of the Carlson girls, decided to visit the family. They were staying at an inn at the time, and she aimed to deliver supplies and offer support. Upon her arrival, she immediately noticed Oakley's absence and inquired about her whereabouts. She was informed that Oakley was grounded. Subsequently, she sent a school colleague to make another supply delivery, but this visit lasted only 5 minutes. The colleague became increasingly concerned that Oakley was not present with her siblings on that day. Growing ever more alarmed about the perplexing absence of the child, Jessica seized an opportunity during a visit from Oakley's younger sister, who was spending the night at her place, to gently inquire about Oakley's whereabouts. To her shock, the 6-year-old girl responded with visible irritation, stating that Oakley no longer existed and had been taken in by her adoptive parents. This startling revelation prompted Jessica to take immediate action. She promptly contacted the County Child Protective Services office, expressing her deep concern about Oakley's safety and requesting a welfare check to ensure the child's well-being. On December 6, 2021, authorities conducted a visit to the hotel where Oakley Stanley had been staying after the fire, with the aim of assessing the situation regarding the missing child. Jordan greeted them at the door, holding a 2-year-old child in her arms, and indicated that the family was in the process of packing up. The ensuing conversation was fraught with unsettling signs. When questioned about Oakley's whereabouts, Jordan responded that Oakley was with her foster mother. The officer pressed her to confirm if she was indeed the child's mother, to which she affirmed. However, when asked again about her daughter's location, Jordan's response was to turn around and seek confirmation from someone else in the room if the child was with her foster parents. At this juncture, the officer beckoned Andrew closer to the entrance and posed the same question about his daughter's whereabouts. He replied that Oakley was with his parents, referring to the child's grandparents, but admitted he did not have their address or phone number. Eventually, he provided this crucial information to the police. According to official records, the officers reached out to Andrew's father, who disclosed that they had not seen their granddaughter since December 2020, when she had spent Christmas with them. Subsequently, authorities visited the grandparents' residence in person, confirming that the child was indeed not with them. Realizing their investigative options narrowing, they contacted social services personnel to inquire if the child was in foster care. However, according to the officials, the child should have been with her biological parents. Upon returning to the Carlsons' hotel room, the officials informed Andrew that the child was not with her grandparents. Rather than displaying concern, he appeared oddly indifferent, as if he had prior knowledge of the information they had just conveyed. Jordan's reaction, while different, was equally perplexing. She erupted in anger, tightly clenched her fists, and declared her refusal to answer their questions before promptly retreating to the room. For the authorities, it was becoming increasingly apparent that the Carlsons were harboring something. Adding to their concerns was a peculiar observation made regarding the family's vehicle parked at the hotel. There was only one child safety seat, despite the fact that they were supposed to have 4 children, all under the age of 10. On the same day, around 2 p.m., Jessica, the school director, contacted the police to report an unusual incident. Jordan had called the school during regular school hours, citing an emergency and expressing the need to pick up her 6-year-old daughter. Acting on the cautionary side, the authorities promptly instructed the school not to release the child to her parents. However, the warning turned out to be unnecessary as Jordan and Andrew failed to show up at the school. Approximately an hour and a half after the call, 32-year-old Jordan and 36-year-old Andrew departed the hotel with their 2-year-old child, but their departure did not go unnoticed. Both of them were arrested for obstruction as they had immediately refused to cooperate with the ongoing investigation. Simultaneously, on the same day, the police made a public appeal on social media seeking assistance from the community to help locate Oakley. According to a report from a local newspaper, this marked a turning point as Child Protective Services assumed custody of the 2- and 6-year-old children. As for the 9-year-old, the identity of the guardian who assumed custody remained undisclosed. The family's residence and property underwent a thorough examination with detectives from the county police and the FBI working together. Despite their meticulous search of the house, they found no sign of the missing girl or any evidence suggesting she had been living there recently. What stood out was that while all her siblings had designated bedrooms, there was no indication of a room for Oakley, and her clothing and toys were noticeably absent. A significant discovery for the ongoing investigation was the presence of bloodstains on the blinds, the front door, and a handprint on one of the walls. On December 6th, Andrew and Jordan found themselves in the county jail, each with a bond set at $150,000 and a 72-hour hold, all due to suspicions of involuntary manslaughter. However, as the investigations progressed, additional charges were brought against them in the following days. They now faced allegations of second-degree abandonment of a dependent person. This new charge stemmed from the authorities' discovery that for approximately 15 months, the couple had failed to provide their 6-year-old daughter with the prescribed medical treatment, resulting in a severe decline in her health that posed a risk of death. The police clarified that this was the sole charge that would keep them detained, and the bond remained in effect. Oakley's paternal grandparents issued a statement emphasizing their full cooperation with the investigation and their singular objective: to locate their missing granddaughter. They also shared their prayers for the child's safe return and expressed gratitude for all those diligently working to find her. On December 13th of the same year, the search efforts officially concluded. Law enforcement authorities reported extensive searches that covered over 300 acres, scouring for any trace of the vanished child. The police affirmed that every inch of land had been meticulously examined, leaving no stone unturned. However, he underlined that the quest for truth regarding the fate of the little girl was far from over. Despite the parents' claims of having seen the child as recently as November 30th, they were unable to provide any concrete information about her whereabouts or her current condition. Their inability to confirm whether the child was under the care of an adult further compounded the mystery. Yet, considering all the gathered evidence, detectives established a troubling timeline. Oakley had not been seen alive since January 27, 2021. It led them to a grim conclusion that the child couldn't possibly have survived on her own for such an extended period. Given these revelations, authorities issued a heartfelt plea to anyone who may have come into contact with Oakley since January 2021 or had interactions with her parents during that time to step forward with any information they might possess. Furthermore, court documents unveiled disturbing testimonies from Oakley's own siblings who held the grim belief that their sister was no longer among the living. The eldest among them disclosed that their mother had strictly forbidden any discussion about Oakley. They recounted a tragic narrative in which Oakley had supposedly accidentally started a house fire using their mother's lighter, leading to physical abuse and her confinement in a cell beneath the stairs as a form of punishment. Their mother had allegedly told them that Oakley had ventured into the woods and met a tragic fate at the jaws of wolves. Another sibling recalled incidents where Jordan had used a belt to discipline Oakley and had locked her in a closet, expressing deep concerns about their sister's well-being and a haunting fear that she might have succumbed to starvation. Based on the available information, authorities were unable to determine whether Oakley was still alive before the house fire. It's worth noting that legal documents reveal the troubling history. Since 2013, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families had received a total of 11 records related to the Carlsons. Among these, 8 were closely examined in light of allegations involving domestic violence, physical abuse, parental drug use, and medical neglect. In February 2022, a significant development unfolded in the case against Jordan and Andrew. This time, they faced fresh charges for endangering their children by exposing them to a controlled substance. This shocking turn of events stemmed from the alarming discovery of dangerously high levels of methamphetamine in the bodies of 2 of their children. A month later, on March 14th, it was reported in the media that Andrew had pleaded guilty to separate charges of endangering 2 of his children with drugs. Unfortunately, his guilty plea did not yield any information that could shed light on the circumstances surrounding Oakley's disappearance. It was also announced at that time that Andrew would face sentencing at the March, with the maximum penalty being 12 months of imprisonment. In response to these developments, concerned citizens gathered near county jail, demanding that the Carlsons reveal the fate of their daughter. The protesters raised their voices, labeling Jordan as a monster rather than a mother. Among the demonstrators stood Oakley's foster mother, who expressed her dissatisfaction with the potential 1-year sentence for the biological father, emphasizing that the children's trauma would extend far beyond that period. As planned, Andrew's sentencing hearing unfolded on March 28th, conducted through a video call. The judge delivered a 12-month sentence for endangering the minors. While pronouncing the verdict, the judge directed her words toward the defendant, highlighting the fundamental duty of a parent to protect their children, a duty he had evidently failed to fulfill. Moreover, the judge imposed several restrictions on Andrew. These restrictions included a prohibition on consuming controlled substances. Additionally, he was mandated to undergo a chemical dependency assessment within 45 days of his release, follow a recommended treatment, and provide proof of compliance to the court for the subsequent 6 months following his release from prison. In early April 2022, shortly after Andrew's sentencing, Jordan also entered a guilty plea. She admitted guilt on the 2 charges of exposing her children to contact with a controlled substance. Consequently, on April 22nd, she received a 20-month prison sentence. Moreover, she was subject to a restriction that prevented her from having any contact with minors under the age of 18 without proper supervision. However, in January 2023, shortly after her release following her sentence related to 2 of her children, Jordan faced legal issues once again. This time, she was arrested for fraud and identity theft. Authorities revealed that she had fraudulently acquired 4 credit cards using personal information from friends and family. Interestingly, 3 of these illicitly obtained cards were discovered obstructing a toilet in the hotel room where the couple had stayed following their house fire. It was also disclosed that Jordan had spent over $40,000 using these cards, making purchases at Walmart and eBay, and even withdrawing cash for gambling at a casino. Jordan eventually reached a guilty plea agreement. Initially facing a 36-month sentence, the judge, exercising discretion, decided to impose a longer sentence. Consequently, Jordan was sentenced to 43 months in jail. Meanwhile, Oakley's foster parents have remained actively engaged in their relentless search for the missing child. They have continued to express their frustration and heart attack, maintaining that the decision to return the girl to her biological parents was made hastily and put the child's well-being at risk, given that Andrew and Jordan were deemed unfit, both mentally and physically, to care for her. Oakley's disappearance had a profound impact on the public, evoking significant interest and empathy. The local community not only cooperated with law enforcement, but also assembled in front of the county courthouse on multiple occasions, demanding justice. Additionally, an online petition was launched in December 2021, amassing over 7,000 signatures. The petition sought to advocate for a support system aimed at safeguarding children who were returning to their families after exciting the foster care system. It also called for mandatory long-term drug testing for families reuniting with their children. This petition eventually evolved into a bill known as the Oakley Law. While it was reported in February 2023 that the bill had encountered obstacles in the Washington state legislature, it did prompt responses from representatives of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families in the state. These officials agreed to engage in discussions regarding policy and budget options, indicating the continued effort to address critical child welfare issues. The fate of Oakley remains shrouded in mystery, presenting a perplexing puzzle for investigators. Their most plausible scenario suggests that the young girl may have tragically lost her life. However, since her disappearance, an unsettling hypothesis has emerged that Jordan might have sold her. The investigation has grappled with an inundation of leads, which has proven to be one of its most challenging aspects from the very outset. The county police has been inundated with reports from all over the country, each suggesting potential sightings of the missing girl. They've diligently collaborated with law enforcement agencies across the United States, meticulously examining every lead. Regrettably, none of these leads has yielded any information about Oakley's whereabouts. Another formidable hurdle faced by investigators was the absence of a clear timeline pinpointing when the girl disappeared. To construct a timeline, they had to painstakingly piece together who had interacted with Jordan, Andrew, and Oakley in the months leading up to her disappearance. This endeavor involved tracking down family members, school personnel, and scoring surveillance footage from various stores. The investigators acknowledged that it would have been relatively straightforward if they were dealing with a family or a group of people who adhered to a consistent, predictable routine. However, in this case, the family's movements were marked by unpredictability. As of the conclusion of this investigation, Oakley's parents had not provided any information concerning the child's fate, and both continued to be regarded as suspects in her disappearance. The investigations remains active and ongoing. In their relentless quest for clues, the police has extended an $85,000 reward. This is the story of Tara Calico, a bright young college student who vanished while she was out on a bike ride, leaving behind a mystery that endured for over 30 years and a notorious Polaroid that made international headlines. But who were those teenagers in the Polaroid? Were they really captives? And was the photo a clue to Calico's fate? These questions have lingered for nearly 30 years ever since Calico went missing one September morning in 1988. In this video, let us find out what actually happened and whether Tara Calico was finally found. 19-year-old Tara Calico from Valencia County, New Mexico, was described as an ambitious person. She planned out most of her days by trying to fit in as many activities as possible, often making detailed daily schedules. She excelled in high school and was a sophomore at the University of New Mexico at Valencia, where she was studying to become a psychologist. She worked at a local bank and was also an extremely athletic young woman who enjoyed running and cycling. Her friends said that she was someone most people would absolutely admire. But the highly ambitious Tara didn't know that life always doesn't go as it is planned, and that her hobby of cycling would strangely prove to be a reason for a setback in her journey towards her ambitions. On the morning of September 20th, 1988, Tara left her home in Valletta County, New Mexico to go for her daily bike ride. Her route was the same every day along New Mexico State Road 47. Her mother, Patty Dole, knew it very well because the pair of them often traveled together, though lately Patty had been skipping rides. A recent incident in which a car drove aggressively close to her, deliberately passing her multiple times, had made her nervous and less inclined towards her ride. However, Tara continued the tradition, cheerfully refusing her mother's suggestion that she should carry a mace. It was the same sunny stretch she had been riding for years and nothing bad had ever happened. As she headed out the door, Tara jokingly told her mother that she'd better come looking for her if she didn't show up by noon. Was she indirectly hinting towards something that she already knew about? Or this was just a casual talk of something might go wrong, which eventually did. Tara had a tennis date with her boyfriend at 12:30 that she was determined to keep. But noon came and went and Tara never returned home. When Tara didn't arrive home by noon from her bike ride, as told by her daughter, Patty left home to search for her daughter. She drove her car through the 17-mile bike route that Tara took but did not see her daughter. Katie then drove the bike route again to see if she could spot Tara, but it was to no avail. Worried, she called the local hospital to see if her daughter was there, then contacted the rescue unit. This marked the beginning of one of the longest and the most unique investigations in the history of law enforcement books. Tara entered the National Crime Information Center system as a missing person and an exhaustive 2-week search ensued, which involved state police, the military, but neither Tara nor her mother's bicycle turned up. The search team then noticed bike tracks veering off the road and a Boston cassette tape, which Tara was listening to on her Walkman. In addition, they also found the front view window piece of Calico's Walkman. Investigators interviewed at least 7 individuals who reported seeing Calico on her bike ride. All of them claimed to have seen Calico riding north toward her home. Of the 7 witnesses, 5 recalled seeing an old pickup truck following Calico along the highway. They also reported seeing Calico wearing headphones and listening to her Walkman. The search party later discovered Tara's bike tracks, cassette tape, and a piece of her Walkman within a 3-mile radius from where the witnesses said they saw her. Without compelling evidence of foul play, police began to question John, Tara's father, and Patty about Tara's home life. Was their daughter happy? Did she ever talk about travel? They suspected that the 19-year-old had run away from home, a hypothesis that her family vehemently denied, describing Tara as a cheerful girl brimming with enthusiasm in her. The police had nothing in their hands to investigate, and there was no solid clue to trace Tara until nearly 9 months of Tara's disappearance, when a strange discovery gave the investigation some lead. On June 15, 1989, a Port St. Joe resident was preparing to go into a grocery store. She parked adjacent to a Toyota cargo van with a mustached man sitting inside it. After leaving the junior food store, she spotted a Polaroid photo in the space where the Toyota van had been parked minutes earlier. The woman walked over to the picture, picked it up, and stared at the image. It appeared the picture's subjects, a boy and a young woman on their backs with duct tape over their mouths, were in a small enclosed space, such as a windowless vehicle. The woman promptly took the picture to the police department, giving the officers a description of the vehicle and the man parked beside her. The police set up roadblocks in the area, hoping to question the man who was driving the Toyota, but there were no other reported sightings of him. In July 1989, the Polaroid photo appeared on an episode of a TV show called A Current Affair. Some who watched the program contacted Patty Dole, Tara's mother. Despite the photograph being found about 1,600 miles away from where she had gone missing, they thought the young woman in the photograph resembled Tara. Once Patty saw the picture, she too felt that the young lady resembled her daughter. Patty believed the woman had similar features to her daughter, noting a scar on the woman's leg was a match to the scar on Tara's leg from a past car accident. According to Patty, the book shown in the Polaroid next to the girl, A paperback copy of My Sweet Audrina by V.C. Andrews was one of her daughter's favorite books. But the question also was, who was that young boy alongside the girl in the Polaroid picture? Some initially believed the boy in the photo was Michael Hundley. On April 21, 1988, several months before Calico went missing, 9-year-old Michael Hundley went on a hunting trip with his father and a family friend in the Zuni Mountains of New Mexico. They were preparing to hunt wild turkey. But while setting up the camp, Michael disappeared. Michael's father immediately reported the boy missing. But a snowstorm had taken over the area, preventing a thorough search for him. Once the storm subsided, 400 people assisted in the search, but the only clue they discovered was a small footprint in the snow. In July 1989, when a current affair episode aired showing the Polaroid, Michael's parents saw the show and thought the little boy in the photo resembled their son. In fact, his mother stated that she was nearly certain it was Michael in the picture. Cibola National Park, where Michael went missing, is roughly 45 miles from Belen, New Mexico, where Tara Calico vanished. It didn't take long for the investigators to see a potential connection in the disappearances. Calico's mother and the Henleys went to Port St. Joe to examine the Polaroid and talk to the police. After the meeting, the parents determined that their children were in the picture. However, on June 22, 1990, a rancher found skeletal remains in the Zuni Mountains. Dental records confirmed it was Michael's body and that the boy had likely succumbed to hypothermia. Investigators did not suspect foul play and concluded Michael was not the boy in the Polaroid. To figure out if Calico is the young woman in the Polaroid found in 1989, her parents had the photo analyzed by Scotland Yard in London. The lab examined the picture and determined that it was, in fact, Tara Calico. However, the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico also analyzed the photo and concluded that it was not Tara Calico. The FBI conducted an independent investigation into the photograph as well, but the results were inconclusive. Investigators remain baffled by the photo. The only clue they determined from the image is that the photographer likely snapped it after May 1989, as the specific film used was unavailable until that date. In the end, only one family received answers, and there was still no clue about the whereabouts of Tara Calico. Despite the creation of specialist task forces to investigate the disappearance, Tara's case remained cold in the intervening decades. In February 2003, the Doles made the decision to move 2,000 miles from their home in New Mexico to Florida after enduring dozens of fruitless tips and appearing on countless shows such as Oprah, Unsolved Mysteries, 48 Hours, and The Current Affair to beg for news of their daughter. They decided it was time. "Here, there's not anything I can do that doesn't remind me of Tara," Patty Dole said of their home in New Mexico. But a new development emerged in February 2008 when Sheriff Rene Rivera of Valencia County said he knew what happened to Calico and who did it. In an explosive revelation, Rivera claimed that 2 local boys who were in a truck accidentally ran over Calico, and then 2 other men, possibly parents, assisted with helping the men hide Calico's body. Despite knowing the identities of the allegedly culpable men, Rivera explained they have made no arrests because Calico's body remains missing. In 2017, a Reddit thread about Calico included uploaded documents from the New Mexico State Police case file on Calico's disappearance. In the documents, a man named Henry Brown gave an interview with Deputy Mark Mathala claiming he had heard some teen boys talking about hitting Calico with their truck and then sexually assaulting and slaying her. He went on to explain that the teens hid Calico's body in the bushes. But when a search party began looking for her, they moved her into a basement before later dumping her body into a pond. One of the alleged suspects named by Brown was Lawrence Romero Jr., the son of the local sheriff. It is likely Detective Rivera was referring to Romero Sr. when he mentioned in a newspaper interview that the alleged assailants got help from their family in hiding Calico's body. Romero Jr. has since passed. John Dole was angered when he learned of Rivera's claims. He said that there was no reason for the sheriff to publicly announce his suspicions if he couldn't arrest the suspects. 2 other Polaroid photographs that could have been of Tara Calico surfaced over the years. One was a blurry photo of a girl's face with tape covering her mouth, which was found near a residential construction site in Montecito. Forensic evidence suggested it was taken sometime after May of 1989. The second was of a woman loosely bound with her eyes covered sitting next to a man on an Amtrak train dated roughly to February of 1990. No charges were ever brought as a result of either image. Patty Dole found the Montecito image compelling and believed it to be Tara. However, she didn't believe the girl on the train was her daughter. Today, Tara Calico had been missing for more than 30 years. Her disappearance remains one of the most haunting cold cases in recent memory, and at this point, it seems that only chance will turn up answers. However, Calico's sister and best friend have not given up searching for her. The two women stated that they have uncovered new information in 2017, and they even released multi-part podcast titles, The Tara Calico Investigation. Podcast host Escabel discusses different theories regarding Calico's disappearance. On the other hand, Calico's parents passed without learning what exactly happened to their daughter. Patty Dole passed in May 2006, while Calico's father, David, passed 4 years prior to November 2002. In October 2019, the FBI announced a reward of up to $20,000 for anyone who had information that would lead to the location of Tara Calico or the arrest of those responsible for her disappearance. What do you guys think? What happened to Tara Calico? Was she really abducted, or did she actually run away staging her kidnapping? Is she even alive, or was this case a cover-up by a detective and his son? And what about those Polaroids? Can't you solve this mystery and bag the $20,000 from the FBI? Maybe you can. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. In the small town of Whitesboro, New York, lived Mary Yoder, vibrant 60-year-old chiropractor who defied her age with her exuberant spirit and meticulous attention to health through exercise and diet, serving as a role model for her patients. She believed firmly in demonstrating that age shouldn't be a barrier to wellness. At her university years, she met her future husband, William Yoder, a fellow chiropractic student. Their mutual passion led to marriage. Together, they embarked on a joint venture, establishing a chiropractic clinic. William, with his methodical and pragmatic approach, managed the business aspects, while Mary, known for her engaging personality, handled patient care, earning their clinic a reputable status. The Yoders were blessed with 3 children, 2 daughters, Liana and Tamarin, and their cherished son, Adam. By 2015, Adam, 25 years old, was working as a receptionist at the family clinic. His partner, Caitlin Conley, also employed there, came from a disciplined background as the daughter of a retired military officer. Known for her kindness, intelligence, and love for animals, Caitlin was a beloved member of the team. However, not all was perfect in the Yoder household. Despite plans for a leisurely retirement traveling across Europe, financial obligations meant continued work for Mary and William. On a fateful Monday, July 2035, Mary's day was packed with appointments. But as the afternoon unfolded, patients began noticing something off about Mary's usual demeanor. Initially presenting with red, swollen eyes, she shrugged it off as a minor flu symptom. However, things escalated when her skin took on a greenish hue and she began suffering from severe vomiting and diarrhea, leading her to call William for assistance. Upon his arrival, William was shocked to find Mary in a state of apparent shock, a stark contrast to her usually robust health. Despite her condition, Mary initially resisted hospitalization, opting for home remedies and rest. However, by the next morning, her condition had worsened significantly, prompting an urgent visit to the emergency room. There, she underwent intense treatment, including for fluids, to combat her unrelenting symptoms. Despite the efforts of numerous specialists, the cause of her sudden illness remained a mystery, leaving Mary in a state of fear and confusion. On the morning of July 22nd, Mary had her first cardiac arrest, followed by 7 more. By the afternoon, she couldn't hold on any longer and she died. This all happened in the blink of an eye. A woman who always looked healthy deteriorated in just 48 hours and died in a hospital in the worst possible condition. This death seemed very suspicious to Mary's relatives because many of them belonged to the medical field. They started thinking in poisoning as an option, so they immediately requested toxicology tests on the body. At first, the doctors were skeptical about the idea because who would want to poison Mary? This only happens in movies. Mary was so careful that she grew part of her food in her garden, like lettuces. So the first doubt was that maybe an insect from there bit her and caused all this, but what kind of insect could do that? The toxicology tests revealed that Mary was indeed poisoned. First, they tested for arsenic and cyanide, which are the most common poisons in these cases, but no, it didn't seem she was poisoned with those. It wasn't until 2 months later that the lab identified what ended Mary's life. It was colchicine. Colchicine is a medication used for gout as it helps to remove uric acid from the joints, which causes this painful inflammation. But if used excessively, it can remove everything from your body. Mary experienced all the visible symptoms of a colchicine overdose and probably also the invisible ones like intense burning sensations on the skin and in the throat. This is one of the worst ways to die, and undoubtedly the question now was that it's clear Mary wanted to keep living, so who wanted to end her life? So it seems that someone deliberately poisoned her, especially since dying from this medication requires consuming a large amount. Couldn't have been an accident, and Mary wasn't taking this drug for any medical reason. After the case was declared a homicide, the police began their investigation, and the first suspect, as one might suspect and as often happens in such cases, was her husband, William. This could be yet another story where the victim's partner, driven by jealousy or an affair, becomes the perpetrator. Mary's sisters noticed that William was acting unusually, not appearing genuinely upset or saddened. However, in the absence of concrete evidence and after thorough interrogation, William was released due to insufficient grounds for charges, leaving the investigation at a standstill. Then, in a plot twist reminiscent of a thriller film, an anonymous letter surfaced at the police department. The author claimed to have knowledge of the real perpetrator, Adam Yoder, Sarah's youngest son. The letter didn't just make baseless accusations, it provided potentially damning evidence. It alleged that Adam had poisoned Mary's supplements with colchicine, motivated by a strained relationship and either a desire for inheritance or a twisted plan to gain sympathy and favor in her will. Ding on this tip, the police approached Adam's van without a warrant, but with his consent, to everyone's shock, a search revealed a bottle of colchicine under the passenger seat, along with a receipt bearing Adam's personal details. Stunned and proclaiming innocence, Adam insisted he was being framed. The situation was perplexing for the police as well, given the cinematic nature of the anonymous tip and the fact that Adam had been traveling out of state at the time of Mary's illness, which seemingly ruled out the possibility of him administering the poison. The mystery deepened as it became apparent that only 2 individuals had been in close proximity to Mary on the day of her illness: William and Caitlin Conley, Adam's girlfriend. This revelation cast new doubts and opened up further avenues of investigation in a case that seemed to be straight out of a suspense novel. Caitlin was the only one who had been with Mary throughout that day, but the police did not consider her a suspect initially because there seemed to be no motive for her to do such a thing. Moreover, she appeared to get along well with Mary. After Mary's death, Caitlin had even dedicated a post expressing her deep sorrow. However, Caitlin had recently ended her relationship with Adam, and there were a few things about her that didn't quite add up to the police. Thus, they concluded that Caitlin either knew something nobody else did or she was the guilty party. During the interrogation, Caitlin began by suggesting that Adam had been acting a bit strange lately. The interrogator, skilled at his job, asked the crucial question: whether Caitlin had recently written an anonymous letter accusing Adam, forgetting to add her name before sending it to the police. Initially, Caitlin tried to evade the question but ultimately confessed to writing the letter, shifting her status from a witness to a suspect. Now, there were 3 suspects. She claimed that Adam had confessed to her, but her account was riddled with inconsistencies and contradictions, likely a result of the immense pressure she was under. Caitlin also expressed a deep-seated fear of Adam, leading the police to provide her with protection as they delved deeper into the investigation. Crucial piece of evidence emerged when it was discovered that the email address on the colchicine receipt had never been used by Adam. This revelation came from tracking the IP address associated with the email, which led to Caitlin's home computer and phone. Confronted with this evidence, Caitlin initially suggested that Adam might have used her devices without her knowledge. However, This theory was weakened when investigators uncovered that not only had the purchase been made through her phone, but her search history also contained incriminating searches about poisons before Mary's death. Furthermore, Caitlin eventually confessed to buying the prepaid cards used for the purchase. The interrogation reached a climax with the revelation that Caitlin either acted alone or with an accomplice, as the gathered evidence pointed directly to her involvement. Overwhelmed, Caitlin broke down, facing the reality of being arrested for the murder of Mary Yoder. Meanwhile, the Yoder family and community were shaken by the unfolding events. Mary's sisters had harbored suspicions about Adam, their reasons anchored in a combination of hearsay and conjecture. Also, neighbors reported seeing William intimately close with one of Mary's sisters prior to her death, fueling rumors of an affair that could have begun before Mary's untimely demise. They also labeled William a fortune hunter, pointing to Mary's role as the main financial provider in the family. The sisters speculated that William, eager for retirement, saw Mary's death as a means to secure his financial future, especially considering a recent inheritance from his father that was insufficient for both of them to retire comfortably. This theory painted William as a man who orchestrated his wife's murder to ensure his own financial stability. At Caitlin's trial, her defense team pointed fingers at William, suggesting he could have easily tampered with Mary's supplements before leaving the house and had access to the work computer that Caitlin used. Other defenders accused both William and Adam. On this side were Mary's three sisters, who were so convinced of this theory that they created a website called Free Caitlin Conley, outlining their reasons for believing William and Adam were the culprits. However, there were doubts about this theory as well. For instance, one of the sisters claimed to have seen William using colchicine in the past, supposedly for his herb cultivation. But when asked when they last saw him doing this, they said it was in the 1980s, casting doubt on their credibility. Now, the origin of the colchicine used in the crime was a critical point of investigation. There were two potential sources. Firstly, it could have been procured from the stock at the Yoder Family Chiropractic Center. Both Mary and Adam were known to sign for deliveries, and the colchicine was used in treatments at the clinic. William could also access the center through his keys, so he could have easily obtained it. However, Caitlin, as the business administrator who oversaw all materials and financial matters, had even greater access to the clinic's resources. The second possibility was an online purchase. This scenario seemed to implicate Adam due to the receipt details, but also raised suspicions about Caitlin, particularly since the purchase involved a phone call where the operator recalled speaking with a young woman. Despite this, Mary's sisters insisted that Adam had manipulated not only the police and the judge, but also the operator. A claim that appeared implausible given that the receipt listed Adam, a male, as the purchaser. This web of accusations and counter-accusations added layers of complexity to the case. Regarding the IP addresses that traced back to Caitlin's devices, there were theories about William's potential involvement. Some speculated that despite not being tech-savvy, William was intelligent enough to manipulate computers to his advantage. However, this notion was met with skepticism, as basic computer skills do not equate to the expertise required for such deception. On the other hand, Adam, being younger and potentially more tech-literate, might have had the capability to use Caitlin's devices for the purchases. Yet, the idea that he meticulously orchestrated the crime through Caitlin's devices while using his own email with identifiable information for the transaction and then carelessly left the incriminating receipt in his car seemed highly improbable. This scenario was likened to a thief meticulously erasing all evidence at a crime scene only to leave behind a note with their full identity and birth certificate. The intricacies and contradictions within these theories made the investigation exceptionally convoluted and challenging to resolve. As for Caitlin's involvement, it's hard to discern why she would commit such a crime. Looking at the dynamics between Caitlin and Adam, they had a toxic relationship with frequent breakups and reconciliations. Adam, known to struggle with alcohol and drug abuse, had been aggressive towards Caitlin on several occasions, including an allegation of sexual assault in 2014. Adam also had trouble finding stable employment and was not very responsible in his job at the clinic. Before Mary's death, she had started to become stricter about giving him money, adding to the complexity of the relationships within this family. Mary's sisters' contributions were also met with some skepticism. They alleged that following Mary's death, William and Adam were frequently seen together, hinting at possible collusion. However, it's a natural tendency for family members to seek solace in each other's company during times of grief, making this observation not necessarily indicative of guilt. The website created by Mary's sisters, filled with extensive text and purported evidence, didn't automatically lend credence to their theories. The sisters also questioned Adam's innocence because he brought a lawyer to his police interrogation, unlike Caitlin. This action, however, could be interpreted as a prudent move, especially considering Adam discovered a purchase of colchicine in his name in his car. The situation was rife with tangled suspicions and accusations, complicating the search for the truth. In legal contexts, having a lawyer present during interrogation is generally advisable. Caitlin initially faced questioning as a witness before her arrest. Her interrogation raised red flags when she made seemingly incriminating statements, like suggesting that poison is typically a woman's weapon, leading to accusations against her. The investigator countered this by rightly stating that poison could be used by anyone, challenging her line of reasoning. Caitlin's emotional reactions during interrogation, characterized by expressions of despair and feeling trapped, are often associated with individuals realizing the gravity of their situation, a behavior similar to that exhibited by notable criminal figures. The decision to grant William immunity during the trial raised eyebrows. Granting immunity means he could not be prosecuted for Mary's death, a move that might seem unfair to some. However, immunity carries risks. If the individual is found to be lying, it significantly undermines their credibility and can turn them into a prime suspect. In contrast to Caitlin's inconsistent responses, both Adam and William presented less contradictory accounts during their interrogations, adding another layer of complexity to an already intricate case. The motives for the murder could vary. Caitlin was with Mary every day, and Mary was her boss. Hatred towards a boss is a common sentiment, often kept hidden, so Caitlin's Facebook post mourning Mary doesn't necessarily prove her innocence. Some theorize that Caitlin committed the crime to reconcile with Adam. Despite his aggressive nature, there's evidence suggesting Caitlin often sought reconciliation with Adam. After Mary's death, they did get back together for a time, but then separated again. Interestingly, the anonymous letter accusing Adam arrived at the police around the time of their breakup. Determining the guilty party was not easy and the trial took a long time. Finally, on November 6, 2017, Caitlin Conley was sentenced to 23 years in prison with the possibility of parole in May 2037. To this day, there are those who believe this was an injustice. One looks at the case superficially and emotionally. It might seem that William had every motive to commit the crime, but evidence must guide case resolutions. William appears innocent, or at least seems so, because his actions are consistent with his psychological profile of being a serious person, among other things. In complex cases like this, where emotions and suspicions run high, it's the hard evidence that ultimately leads to the resolution. In complex criminal cases, similar to those often featured in true crime narratives, a recurring theme is the presence of high levels of narcissism in the perpetrators, with the notable exception of serial killers and similar profiles. In the trial involving the mysterious death of Mary Yoder, William, her husband, displayed notable attentiveness towards their son Adam, acknowledging the emotional toll the case had taken on him. However, William's involvement with his deceased wife's sister raised eyebrows, marking it as socially inappropriate behavior. Talking about Adam, there were certain aspects of his behavior and history that seemed to indicate a lack of sound judgment. This was inferred from his public interviews, known issues with aggression and alcohol, and a tendency towards impulsive actions. These traits suggested that devising a complex, calculated plan, such as sending an incriminating letter in his own name, was out of character for him. Conversely, Caitlin's psychological profile appeared to align more closely with the crime's nature. She demonstrated a self-centeredness that fit the typical profile of such perpetrators. Moreover, her intricate involvement in the case, particularly in accusing Adam, raised questions about her methods. Why resort to an anonymous letter and a convoluted scheme instead of directly contacting the police? It seemed likely that she was aware of the insufficient evidence against Adam and thus orchestrated a more elaborate plot. the investigators' observation that criminals often commit offenses under the belief that they won't get caught resonates in this context. Many believe they have devised an infallible plan and consider themselves more clever than others. This overestimation of one's intelligence is a common trait among criminals, but as this case demonstrated, their plans often unravel spectacularly. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.